Mesachas Kesubos Daf Tes Zayin begins the second parak of the Masechta, Parak Isha Shenas Armala, which begins with the Mishnah, which discusses what happens when a man and his wife are arguing over whether she was a Besula or an Almana at the time that they got married. The Mishnah will list what potential proofs we could have, and then it adds a seemingly unrelated phrase. The Gemara will discuss first, who is the author of this Mishnah, who does it fit with? Secondly, what is the relevance of that unrelated phrase there? What is that all about? Then the Gemara will get into how can you be sure she won't collect iksuba a second time? What steps do we take to make sure she can only get one dip? And the Gemara will, at the end, get into some of the details of the proofs that we said that indicate that she was a psula at the time of her marriage. So let's begin with the last few lines of Daf Tezvav, where we begin the Parak Isha Shenas Armala, and the Mishnah says you have a woman who's collecting ksuba. Either she has been divorced from her husband and she's arguing with her husband, or her husband died and she's arguing with his inheritors. Either way, she's claiming she gets a ksuba of 200 zuz because she was a psula at the time of her marriage, and he or they say, no, when I married you, you were an almana. Therefore, you only get a ksuba of an almana, which is 100 zuz. So the Mishnah says you need to have proof that she was a psula. And the proof would be witnesses that at the time of the wedding there was something called hinuma, or that she went to the chuppah with her hair uncovered. Hinuma, the Gemara will explain later on Daf Yud Zayin. The Gemara will say it's either that she had a veil or that she had a canopy of hadas leaves. These are things that they customarily had only for a psula. So those are two proofs, the Mishnah says. Rav Yochanan ben Broka says there's a third proof if they gave out roasted wheat kernels to the children. That's a sign of simcha. These are all things they did for a psula. That if he can establish that these things happened at their wedding, that would establish that she is a psula. The clear implication is that otherwise the husband would win and she could only get a ksuba of 100 zuz. Now the Mishnah adds in a seemingly unrelated phrase, and it says Rabbi Shua agrees that if somebody says to his friend, look, this field that I have used to be your father's field, but I bought it from him. The guy knew nothing about it. He's just someone sitting on his field, and he comes over to him and he says, this used to be your father's, but I bought it from your father. So we believe him because I had no way of knowing that there was anything here, there was anything to discuss, if not for the fact that he came over and said it used to be your father's. Now, he doesn't have proof that he bought it, but he didn't have to say anything at all, and therefore he's believed when he says that he bought it without proof that he bought the field. All right, the Gemara now begins, and the Gemara wants to apply the machlokas which we've been discussing in the last few daf. At the end of the first parak, we had a machlokas between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua. You have a dispute between a man and his wife, whether or not what exactly happened to a woman to make her a non-besula. And over there, Rabbi Gamliel had said, you believe the woman, either because she is a bari and the husband is a shema, she knows for sure, and the husband is just saying, I don't know exactly what happened, or because the woman has a chazaka that she was a besula or a kshera up until this point. Therefore, you always believe the woman when she says what happened. She could be saying that she was mukas eitz, or that she was a besula at the time of the marriage. We had 4 different cases where we discussed this machlokas, and Rabbi Shua and all of them said that the husband wins, not the wife, and he's not impressed by the bari v'shema, and he's not impressed by the chazaka. So the Gemara says here the clear implication is that if you didn't have proof that she was a psula, the assumption would be that she was an almana, which means that the husband wins, and she cannot collect the 200 juz ksuba. So that would seem to me that this is a stam mishnah, which goes against Rabban Gamliel. It's clearly showing not like Rabban Gamliel, and that would seem to indicate that the halacha is not like him. So the Gemara says no, not necessarily. Rabban Gamliel agrees to this mishnah. The reason is as follows. First of all, in all the cases that he discussed, the woman was a bari. She said, I know for sure what happened to me, and I can tell you, and you can't argue. And he just says, listen, I don't know. Maybe she's telling the truth. Maybe she's lying. In this case, though, the husband's saying, no, I know she was an almana. I know I married an almana. I'm very aware of what happened. So therefore, her position is not strong. And even though she has a chazaka, she still has a chazaka that she started her life as a psula, and therefore Chazaka would say that she was still a psula at the time of the marriage, but that's not going to help if it's a bari, and in bari it only helps if it's a bari against the shema. Now, the Gemara says that such an obvious answer, Rabbi Gamliel, and everything he said was talking about a bari v'shema. Why did we have a havamina otherwise here? Why would we have a havamina that Rabbi Gamliel would not agree to this case? There is no bari v'shema here, it's a bari and a bari. So the Gemara says, no, the one who asked the question, he figured like this. He figured even though it's a bari and bari, it's the same as a bari v'shema. And the reason is because there's a rov. Most women who get married as a psula. The woman has a strong rov on her side. So in Rabbi Gamliel's cases up till now, she had on her side the fact that she was a bari and the husband was a shema. Now she doesn't have that. She has something similar. She has the fact that she has a rove that most women get married when they are basulos. Most marriages that take place are between a man and a basula, not between a man and an almana. Therefore, he thought that they were equal, and Rabbi Gamliel should therefore say the same thing. We trust her, we don't trust him. The Gemara's answer, therefore, is a chiddush to say no. The fact that she has a rove does not help her. It's a bari of a bari, and therefore Rabbi Gamliel will agree. Okay, now the Gemara says, we had this last phrase here in the Mishnah where Rabbi Yeshua agreed in the case of the guy who came and he said, this field used to be father's and I bought it. Says the Gemara, that phrase doesn't seem to have any relevance to this Mishnah. Only if you understand that Rabbi Gamliel is agreeing to Rabbi Yeshua in the first part of the Mishnah can you make any sense of the second part of the Mishnah. And then it makes a lot of sense, because Rabbi Gamliel was saying, listen, up till now we were discussing cases where I said the woman's believed. Here I'm telling you a case where I say the man's believed. I agree that the man's believed. And Rabbi Yeshua comes back to him and he says, you know what? I also agree to you in the following scenario. Up till now we were discussing cases where the woman had a good taina, and she could have said a better taina, and therefore you said that she should be believed, and I said she's not believed. And here, in this case, though, I do agree where the guy could have had a better taina. He could have been quiet and not said anything. He could have just kept his field, and no one would have been any the wiser. There, I do agree that because the guy had a better claim, he has a better position, I do agree that the person is believed, the guy who came with the field, that he is believed. So there's a logic there. Rabbi Gamliel agreed to Rabbi Yeshua in the first half of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yeshua said, I agree to Rabbi Gamliel in the second half of the Mishnah. But if you say that Rabbi Gamliel is not the first part of the Mishnah is not Rabbi Gamliel agreeing, so what does the second half of the Mishnah have to do with anything? So the Gemara is it's not really shver. The second half of the Mishnah is not referring to the first half of the Mishnah. The second half of the Mishnah is going back on the end of the last parak where we had a case where there was a migu. The woman had a migu. Migu means that she could have had a stronger claim and she said a weaker claim. And over there, Rabbi Yeshua said, I don't care. The fact that she could have said a stronger claim doesn't prove she's telling the truth. Here, Gamliel is saying, you remember when I said that before, there is one situation where I do agree that she has a strong claim and we believe her because she could have said a better argument had she been lying, and that's this case where with the field where he could have been quiet altogether. So now the Gemara is going to go hunting for what is the case in the last parak where there was a migu, where the woman could have said a better claim, and Rabbi Gamliel said, therefore, we trust what she does say, and Rabbi Gamliel said, we don't. What's that case? Where do you have such a case? And the Gemara is going to go through 4 machlokes in Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua to try to find this case where the woman had a migu, and Rabbi Yeshua said she's not believed anyway. So the Gemara's first attempt is that we're referring to the case where the woman was pregnant, and they argued over who's the father of the child. And there the discussion wasn't ksuba, the discussion was whether or not she is mutter to kahuna afterwards, or whether the person she had bia with asar to kahuna. Says the Gemara, there's obviously no migu. She said he was a kosher. What better taina could she have said? She couldn't have said she wasn't nival to anybody, she's pregnant. So that clearly there's no migu there. Second case, let's maybe say that it's where we had a machlokes from Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, what happens when we saw the woman talking to somebody? That's the wording of the Mishnah. We saw her talking to someone, and we said, what's the story? And she said, oh yeah, I was nivel to him, but he's a kosher, and therefore she's still mutter to Kuna. Very similar, except that she's not pregnant. Says the Gemara, is there a migu here? Could she have said something else? And the Gemara says, depends how you understand what talking means. As we said, talking there doesn't just mean she spoke to somebody. And a machlokes between Zeiri and Rav Asi what talking means. Zeiri said that talking means that she was in yichud with the guy. So there, when she admitted that she was nival to him, but she said he was a kosher, she could have said a better taina. She could have said I had yichud, but I was never nival. Because she didn't say that better taina, she must be telling the truth. And therefore, it makes sense. Rabbi Gamliel said that we believe her because she has a migu. Rabbi Yeshua said we don't trust a migu. Here he's saying this type of migu we do trust. Says in Gemara though, but according to Rav Asi, who said that midaberes, speaking there means that we knew she was nival, so she doesn't have a better claim. What could she have said? We knew she was nival on her own. All she could say was she was a kosher, and therefore we're going to have to keep looking for another case where Rabbi Yeshua didn't hold the migu, or he held the migu doesn't help. Says Gemara, okay, well, I'll go to the third case, and that's where we had a situation here. It's an argument between the man and the woman. He finds that she's not a psula. She says she was a mukas eitz. She lost it without a bia. And he says, no, you had a bia, and therefore you lose your ksuba. So over there, she could have had a better taina. Could she have? So the Gemara says it depends what amount of money they're arguing over, and that was a machlokes Amoraim there as well, what they're arguing over. So we said there was a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rabbi Elazar, by her saying that she was a mukas eitz, she only gets a ksuba of 100, and he's saying, no, you're not a mukas eitz, you had a bia, you're a be'ula, and therefore you get a ksuba of 0. So therefore, in that case, she could have had a better taina. Her better taina would be, she could have said that I'm a mukas eitz. Not only am I a mukas eitz, but I was a mukas eitz after we were already engaged. And therefore, it's your problem. You already, at the time that we got engaged, you were kona mekach, I was really a basula. I had my basulim intact. I became a mukas eitz later, and therefore I still get my full ksuba. I get a ksuba of 200. She didn't say that. She agreed that it happened before, and she agreed that she tricked him, and therefore she agreed that she only gets a ksuba of 100. Why'd she do that? She could have had a better time and gotten a ksuba of 200. Must be she's telling the truth. That's a case of a migu, and on that Rabbi Shua disagrees and says, no, we don't trust her anyway. So here, it would make sense that he's saying, no, I hold to this migu. However, that all is only in the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. In the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, she was claiming that she gets a ksuba of 200. She says a mukas eitz, even if she tricked him, gets a ksuba of 200. So then what better time could she have said? Nothing would have gotten her any more money. She would have said that I became a mukas eitz after we were already engaged, after kiddushin. That wouldn't change anything. So therefore, there is no better taina she could have said, and she has no migu. So therefore, we have to find our fourth case, and this is the Gemara's final, and that's where she found it to be not a psula, and she agreed that she had a bia. She said she was nenas, she said she was raped, and she said it happened after kiddushin, and therefore she said she gets her full ksuba. And he said, no, it happened before Kedushin, and therefore you tricked me, and therefore you don't get a ksuba at all. Now, what better taina could she have said? So over there, she didn't have to say that she was raped at all. She didn't have to say that she was nival. She could have said that she was a mukas eitz. If she would have said she was a mukas eitz, there's a big advantage, because there's no problem for kahuna if she's a mukas eitz. Kohanim are allowed to marry mukas eitz. Now that she said she was nanas, we have all kinds of shilas. Maybe she became usher to kahuna, especially if the husband was a kohen himself. Maybe she became usher to him. So therefore, she definitely had a better taina. And Rabbi Shua still says she's not believed. He doesn't hold that the migu means anything. Just because she could have said a better taina doesn't mean she's telling the truth now. And Rabbi Shua now comes in this Mishnah and he says, no, though that's true. Although I argue, and I'm not impressed by that migu, this case of the field where the guy says, it was your father's field, but I bought it from him. There, we do trust him because he could have done something better. He could have just been quiet. It says, what's the difference between this migu and that migu? Either way, you're saying that he should be trusted because he could have had a better position. The Gemara says, no, this is very different. Here, there's no reason for him to open his mouth. If he was a liar, he just would mind his own business. We would never have a question. We would never have anything to talk about. We'd never ask him anything. There could be no reason that he said anything unless he was telling the truth, that he really bought it. In the case over there where he knew she wasn't a psula, she had to come up with some kind of taina. She couldn't just not say anything. Maybe she had a different reason that she wanted to say that she was nisanes before. I don't know what her reasons could be. Maybe she was trying to trick it. Maybe she knew that she would have a migu and she was trying to play a game here and trying to get to be trusted because she could have said, hey, I had a better taina had I been a liar. Maybe that's what she was doing. But none of that makes any sense in the case where we would have never had a taina on him. We would have never known who he was. He was just walking by along the street. We wouldn't have any court case at all. Therefore, Rabbi Shua says, in the case where he should have said nothing, he's definitely agreed. That's a strong migu. And here, in the case of nisanes, that is not a strong migu. So though I don't believe this one, I do believe here. All right, now the Gemara wants to go into what is the actual pshat in the halach over here that we trust the husband. So the Gemara says, why don't we say that the woman does have a rove? The majority of marriages that take place, she was a psula. And almana is a minority of marriages. So why don't we just follow the rove here and say that most likely she was a psula and therefore she's right? Why do we trust him if she can't prove that she was a psula? So the Gemara says the reason is because usually when a psula gets married, people know about it. It's a well-known thing. People talk, there's invitations, there's a whole discussion. The marriage of an almana, that's a much quieter event. The fact that there was no history, no one knows what happened by this marriage, means it was a quiet event, and that's proof that she was an almana and not a psula. So the Gemara says, hold on a second, you're telling me it's proof? You're telling me people would have to know about it if she was a psula? So what does it help if witnesses come and say she was a psula? The witnesses are lying. Gemara says, no, okay, so it's not a solid proof. However, the majority of situations in which there's a psula that's getting married, people would be aware of it. So you telling me you have a majority of marriages are a psula. Yeah, well, the majority of psulas people know about. So you have conflicting rovs there. So therefore, there's no reason for us to follow these majorities. We're just back to, I don't know what happened, and therefore we will... The husband has the money. She's trying to get the money away from him. She needs to bring a proof, and the rov she has is weak, and therefore it's not going to help her over here. Okay, now the Gemara wants to go into what is the halachic status of the fact that she's collecting her ksuba here. In all these cases, everything which we've been speaking about, she obviously doesn't have a ksuba, because if she has a ksuba, we look at the ksuba and see how much she's supposed to get. So if she doesn't have the ksuba, maybe she's hiding it somewhere, and if you're going to allow her to collect, she'll go take the ksuba to a different bezdin, pull it out, and now she'll say, look, I have a ksuba, I get money for it. Now, usually, when she collects her ksuba, she has to give the man the ksuba, and then he tears it up, and she can't collect anymore. Here, though, she's not giving him the ksuba, so why we should be afraid that she's going to collect a second time somewhere else. So the Gemara has two ways of dealing with this concern. The Gemara's first approach is that of Rabbi Avo, who says, obviously, this proves that she has to give him a receipt. And then if she tries to collect again, I'll pull out the receipt and say, I paid the ksuba. Now, we have a discussion elsewhere in Shas. Is there a receipt? Do we assume that the husband has to get a receipt? The problem with the receipt is that then he has to keep the receipt. He has to protect it and make sure he doesn't lose it and doesn't get eaten by the mice or whatever it is. That's a big tircha on him to have to keep the receipt. Therefore, there are some who say there's no receipt business. Here, though, the Gemara, according to Rabbi Avo, is saying there's a proof that there is a receipt. Rabbi Papa says no. It's not a proof that there's a receipt. There's a different reason here. We're talking about a scenario where it was a place where people don't write ksubas. She can't go collect a ksuba somewhere else because she doesn't have a ksuba. Because there is, in this town, there's no such thing as a ksuba, and that's why we're not afraid that she's going to go somewhere else. Says the Gemara, this whole conversation may not have taken place around our Mishnah, it could have taken place around a different brisa. Let's see the brisa. That brisa says if a woman loses her ksuba, hides her ksuba, or ksuba gets burnt up, and then we don't know what the story is, was she a psula or not. So here are the proofs. If they danced in front of her at the wedding, or they laughed in front of her, they were very happy, or they passed in front of her a cup of besura, then we'll explain what that is, or a cloth with dam bsulim on it, or the cloth which a woman uses to collect dam bsulim, to prove that she's a besula. Any of these are proofs that she's a ksuba. So we can establish that one of those things happened, then she can get a ksuba of 200 zuz. So here the Gemara says this is where our discussion was. How could she collect the 200 zuz? Maybe she'll take her ksuba out somewhere else. Rabbi Avo says that she must get a receipt. Rav Papa says no, it's a place where we don't write ksubas. Gemara says, what do you mean? How can you say the place we don't write ksubas? He said clearly in this brisa the ksuba was lost, or she was hiding the ksuba. So that means that there was a ksuba, she can collect it somewhere else. The Gemara says no. It's talking about a place where she doesn't get ksubas, but this time the husband gave her a ksuba, and that's what it means when it says that she lost it. She claims she lost it, or she's hiding it. The Gemara says, hold on a second. What does it help if it's a place where she doesn't usually get ksubas? You just told me she got ksubas. Then I'm back to my problem. She could take the ksuba somewhere else and collect with that. So the Gemara says no. So if Rav Papa was talking about this brisa, you have to reread the Mishnah. You have to read it as follows. If she lost her ksuba, it's as if we assume she's hiding her ksuba. That's the first phrase, she lost her ksuba. Second phrase, she's hiding it. So you say if she lost her ksuba, we assume it's if she's hiding it, and she cannot collect without her ksuba here, because we need to make sure she's not going to collect the second time. If, however, we saw that it was burnt, then we don't have an issue. Okay, so that's the Gemara itself agrees this is a forced way to fit into this Mishnah. The Gemara therefore says those who understood that this discussion between Rabbi Avo and Rav Papa were in our Mishnah would say, in our Mishnah it makes sense. In this brisa, it doesn't really make sense because you have to squeeze in that Rav Papa was talking about she didn't have a ksuba, even though the brisa says that she had one and she lost it. Those who said it on the brisa would certainly say it in our Mishnah. The same conversation could take place. All right, now the Gemara goes into we're allowing her to collect based on witnesses that she was a psula because they saw the hinuma or any of the other proofs we said. It says Gemara, one second, maybe she'll take other witnesses and go to a different Beis Din and collect the second time over there with the same claim. So it says obviously then in a case where we know that there's no ksuba, she has to write a receipt. It has to be that a receipt is written there. Everybody would agree that there's a problem. Okay. There's no other way. Otherwise, there isn't any way to avoid that happening again. All right, now the Gemara wants to know what is a kosher b'sura, a cup of b'sura. We said that was one of the proofs that she was a psula. If they passed in front of her at the wedding, a cup of b'sura. What's that? So the Gemara says it's a cup of wine, and it's truma wine. So how is that a proof? So the symbolism is as follows, that she's going to be allowed to eat truma now. Because she's a psula, she's not pasul to kahuna. So if she's marrying a kohen, would she be marrying a kohen? She'd be allowed to eat truma. That shows that she's not almana. Gemara says, what? What does that mean? An almana can eat truma too. An almana who marries a kohen eats truma also. There's nothing wrong with that. If she was an almana from a pasul, yeah, but that doesn't prove she's not an almana. She could be an almana from a kasher. So the Gemara says, therefore, the symbolism is something else. Just like truma is supposed to be from the first of your fruits, this woman is in her first marriage. It's her first beer that's happening now. It's kilu, it's her first fruits. There's a brisa that says, Yehuda says that it actually means that they pass a barrel of wine in front of her. And Rav Ava explains that there's a difference in what type of barrel it is. If she's a psula, they pass a closed barrel to show that she's sealed. If she's a b'ul, they pass an open barrel to show that she's open. Says Umar, why don't you just not pass a barrel at all? Let the passing of the barrel be a symbol that she's a psula. Pass a closed barrel to show that she's a psula. If she's a bula, do nothing. First, the problem is, then maybe later she'll come with a claim and she'll say, I was really a psula. Why was there no barrel? You know what happened to the barrel? They drank it. They got drunk from the barrel, and therefore they forgot to do the ceremony. And she'll have an argument there. Therefore, we want to have a clear symbol that she is an almana. So we're going to do passing an open barrel, and then she won't be able to argue they forgot to do anything. They took the open barrel, clear proof that she was an almana and not a psula at the time of the marriage.